In the next 2 months, that's in the month of August 9th, Kenyans will be going back to the polls to elect leaders who will be managing this country for the next 5 years. But then the composition of the leadership of this country is very important when it comes to the 2/3 gender rule. This has been a thorn in the flesh for so many people here in the country. Women within parliament have tried all that they can to ask their colleagues to ensure that the 2/3 gender rule has been achieved, and the term of this parliament is coming to an end with that not being implemented. But then the court made a ruling, and this week, actually last week, not this week, last week, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, through their chairperson, Wafula Chebukati, wrote a letter to all the political parties saying that, you know what, political parties, ensure that the list you'll be submitting to the Electoral Commission is balanced in terms of the 2/3 gender rule. To have this discussion with me here in studio is not a new face here on KTN News, Florence Mashio, who is the Regional Advocacy Technical Advisor at the Population Action International. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And also joining us virtually is a lady, an advocate representing Katiba Institute, the institute that went to the court to challenge, to ensure that this actually becomes a reality. I'm talking about the executive director of Katiba Institute, and that is Christine Nkonge. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Nkonge, this evening here on KTN Newsline. Good evening.
Thank you.
And also joining us again on KTN News, and not a new face again, Michael Agwanda, our political analyst. And thank you so much, Agwanda, for joining us here on KTN Newsline. Good evening.
My pleasure. Good evening.
So now it is a balanced panel. Gender. So I actually ensured that this panel is also balanced. The 2/3 gender rule has also been applied when it comes to this discussion. But let me begin with Ms. Nkonge, the reason as to why Katiba Institute went to the court to ensure that the 2/3 gender rule is achieved here in the country.
So the reason why we went to court is because the legislation that was supposed to have been passed by Parliament to give a framework to realizing the 2/3 gender rule in the country as required by the Constitution had not been passed, and it was taking too long to be passed. And so what motivated us to go to court is to try and enforce other constitutional standards that provided that you do not actually not only need a law, there are other measures that can be taken to ensure 2/3 gender compliance. And one of them is through the role of political parties in our democracy. Because political parties are the gatekeepers to Parliament, we thought that one of the ways that we can at least promote this right to gender equity in Parliament was to ensure that political parties have gender-compliant party lists.
All right. And you know, Florence, Parliament back in 2020, September, you know, they gave a whole statement through the Speaker of the National Assembly about the 2/3 gender rule, saying that Parliament is a proverbial punching bag, and that it's actually the government that should be working towards achieving 2/3 gender rule also through the cabinet. And that we've seen, yes, the president has really tried.
Well, I think Parliament was not being sincere, because the way we elect our leaders is through the party system. And for you to be anywhere on the ballot, you have to go through the parties. Very few people will go through independent, because parties behind you ensure that at least, you know, you get known by the public, blah, blah, blah. But the challenge has been our party system from the party level. If they do not allow more women to run on their ticket, and they do not give the female candidates opportunities, then when the final ballot, I mean by the IEBC comes out, you find there are fewer women. So the onus is back to the parties, and I'm glad IEBC has written, you know, to parties to do what is right by the people of this country, because we need balanced representation. And if we don't have it, then again we will continue, women will continue being challenged and suffer, because we are being led by one gender only.
You know, there's those who argue, before I bring in Michael Agwanda, there's those who argue, like, you know, we have the women representative seat.
The reason actually we even have the women representative seat is because the 2010 Constitution saw the need to actually introduce more women in Parliament, because the party system was not working. And even with 47 women representatives, it's not even representative enough of how we are constituted as a nation in terms of male and female. So there is definitely a need to do rigorous effort within parties to ensure that the list they give IEBC has a balanced equation. Let the Kenyans decide who I want, but let's see female faces and let's see male faces on the ballot.
Right. And Agwanda, you know, back in 2018, if I'm not wrong, IEBC had a meeting with political parties on the 2/3 gender rule compliance. This never happened, you know, in terms of political parties just trying to ensure that the gender rule compliance is adhered to. Then now, again, IEBC writes a letter after Katiba Institute went to court and won that case. Actually, I need to tell our viewers why. IEBC wrote that letter, Katiba Institute, and that's why we have Christine Konge here, the executive director of that institute, went to court to ensure that this is adhered to. They won that case, and hence IEBC wrote a letter. But then, I wonder, why are political parties acting like, you know, they've been, I don't have to say pants down, but it's like that's how they're acting, like they were not aware of this.
They only learned surprise.
Surprise, yeah, is the rule, adhere to it.
Well, thank you for asking that question. To my colleague there that has said that we'll continue to be led by one gender, I think that might be not a very accurate statement. I think we are in a country where we have a democratic space, and that democratic space is supposed to allow both genders to be involved in a competitive race. It is important for IEBC to remind the political parties of their responsibility to see the 2/3 rule, which is a constitutional mandate, but the practicality of it is something that is yet to be determined. We can go to court as many times as we want, but if women do not come out to look for those positions, then it becomes very critical to note that in, for example, a parliamentary seat, nominations comes as a result of how many elected members in a political party represented in parliament, whether it is in the Senate, parliament, or county assembly. Now, if there are fewer nomination slots, it is as a result of the members of parliament within that political party. If there are many, it will be as a result of the numbers in parliament for that particular party. But that is the far that the party can go in terms of nominating the women into the National Assembly. If they ran for those positions competitively, and they were given a nod in the primaries or in the nomination to run for those positions, then it will be better for them to increase the numbers. But as you've said, rightfully said, I think we've seen 3 or 4 times that Parliament has tried to enact or implement this law, and it's just become practically impossible. And the fundamental question that they've been asking themselves is, where do we get the numbers if these were people that were elected by the citizens themselves?
And bring a very pertinent question right there, Agwanda, which I'd also want Nkonge to respond to it, even as she responds to this question. So Nkonge, I mean, if Kenya is a democracy as per the preamble of the Constitution, the 2010 Constitution, then when do we have, where do we have then we have probably, not even probably, we have Article 27 on gender parity, which contradicts actually Article 38 on political rights, basically the rights of Kenyans to choose the leader that they want, be it male or female.
I think you're correct about that provision, but we will find within that provision, it recognizes that Kenya has been a country where there have been certain inequalities, including gender inequalities. And within that same article, it says that women and men must be given equal opportunities in political, economic, social, and cultural spheres, and where we've found that there's been a history of oppression or repression, this same constitution requires affirmative action measures to be taken to redress those historical disadvantages. And as one of us here said, one of those measures, as had been introduced in the Constitution, was the 47 women representative. But we do not stop there, because the Constitution goes on further and says, apart from the 47 representatives, as a first step, we need all elective bodies to have not more than 2/3 gender of either sex. So the Constitution is actually requiring us to do even more to recognize greater representation of women in this country.
Right,
so Parliament will be compliant if it's 2/3 gender women or 2/3 gender men. Either is fine. What I find to be...
what you find?
What I find to be a bit of pushback is this idea that Parliament can never be 2/3 gender women, right? And we are only always trying to fight for the minimal, because there's this narrative that women are coming to take what belongs to the other gender. It is not about that. It's about equal representation, to be able to make women...
But then, Konge, I mean, yes, you're talking about giving women the equal opportunities. It's been given to them, but very few women want to join politics because of the hostile environment that politics has been.
Exactly, and that is one of the roadblocks to this. So the idea is you need to redress and solve the roadblocks and problems that pose challenges to women being in and running for political offices. We cannot use that as an excuse of saying that nobody is coming forward when we know the system has set up roadblocks to make it almost impossible for women to vie without fearing for their own physical, mental, and other well-being. So we need to address and remove all these roadblocks if you are really going to realize what the spirit behind this article within our Constitution.
Right.
Equal representation.
All right. So, Florence, how then will political parties achieve this? Because we've seen even the big female politicians not winning during these party nominations. So, party nominations are done.
If you analyze the party primaries that have occurred, you have seen in some places parties have chosen to pay loyalty by saying we are giving a ticket to so-and-so because they are more loyal, and not necessarily allowing, wananchi to actually vote and decide this is the person we want to represent us. So in those cases, why aren't they giving them to women within their parties? Because I know there are women who are very loyal to their parties.
But we've seen, the likes of the ODM party issuing a direct ticket, actually asking a male politician to step down in favor of a female politician in Migori County, in Homa Bay County.
Those are very few cases, and that is not enough. The challenges of women and the structural challenges that she's talking about, Christine is talking about, are very clear and are very disturbing for women who want to run for office. The issues of sexual violence is a big deal. There's a UN report that came out talking about the barriers that women who want to run for office face. Indeed, last year in December, I hosted about 16 women from sub-Saharan Africa who are running for office. And the barriers are the same. Even the countries that you think are more progressive, where when Brenda chooses to run for office, the first thing we're going to attack is her sexuality. We're going to also attack who she's married to. After all, Brenda came from Homa Bay and she's being married in Muranga. And so the Muranga people are thinking, why are you representing us? You're not from here, yet you're married. So the barriers that women face, both cultural, structural, resources, and also the issue of gender-based violence becomes a huge barrier for women to say, wait a minute, let me run. Most women choosing between my family and choosing between political career when I'm being threatened, I'd rather step back than risk my family. Men would risk their family. After all, I want to run. But women, we are very cautious. We lead by the heart. So if if parties are not deliberate and they're not recognizing these barriers that exist, even within their own political entities, then they'll not be able to get as many women as we need, so that in the end, we have more. Every election year, we have more women on the ballot for you and I to choose.
Right. So I wonder, why then are political parties faced with the 2/3 gender rule headache? Because that is the headache they're having right now.
You know, one of the questions that I will ask myself is perhaps the affirmative action need to find out in their heart whether they beat more than they could chew. Because if they're talking about the gender-based violence, they're talking about the hotly contested primaries, which stops the women from getting involved in this. Perhaps that's where they needed to begin first. Because if there's a question of them not being able to be in the field because of the environment, then perhaps the laws that will favor those actions and eliminate some of those bottlenecks should have been put in place first, and they should have fought for it.
Agwanda, allow me to cut you. If I got you right, you're saying that women are asking for more than they can chew? Political parties?
Perhaps that's what I'm saying. Perhaps that's what I'm saying. If they are saying that they cannot be in the field or in the primaries because of gender-based violence, because of the hotly contested seats where they will be targeted, then perhaps that is where they needed to begin, because this is a democratic space. And again, for them to say that the parties have not tried this time round, I can give an example of primaries where I was involved, and that was in ODM primaries. And if you look at Homa Bay, where I come from, basically all the women sitting members of parliament were given a direct ticket as a result of trying to mitigate the idea of two-third gender rule. The question is, will it be enough? Absolutely not. And if it will not be enough, then it is practically impossible to say that those men that have gotten the nomination certificates need to step down for the women. And I think that's where the parties find it very, very difficult to accommodate the two-third gender rule. And I think going forward, perhaps we need to start mitigating on how we can solve this matter in a very amicable way, but not through a constitutional court, because it seems like there are laws that can be practically not be implemented as a result of the democratic space of allowing all the candidates to throw themselves into the ring and to be nominated and elected by the people. And if the people decide, and for your information, there are more women than men in this case, if they were committed to ensuring that the representation in parliament will be more women than men, then they should be able to particularly target the women and say, you can elect your own, in this case, to be represented in parliament.
All right, Agwanda, I mean, Florence looks like she's totally disagreeing with what you're saying, but before I get her sentiments, Christine, I mean, Agwanda is saying that women are asking for more than they can chew, and clearly their parliament should have put in place laws that actually say how these seats will be attained. Is it, do you think then the current women parliamentarians have failed their fellow women who want to join politics in terms of laws?
I find it a very interesting statement. Whenever this conversation comes in, women are blamed for the state of affairs that I would say, even as we were, and I totally don't agree with what she has said, and I'll come back and explain that. So when we were litigating this case, one of the simple statements that IBC said was that if there was true political will, this issue would have been solved long time ago. And let's not forget that every time the issue of a legislation to create a framework for two-thirds gender has come about 4 times, there was no quorum. So there seems to be a deliberate, effort, at least for the people who are involved in those parliaments when those votes were coming in, not to ensure this framework is passed. So again, as we have said, there's a structural systemic issue that is being a block to the realization of this two-thirds gender issue. And this issue is not only a women's issue, it's a Kenyan issue. Remember, this is something that we passed in our 2010 constitution. And this 2010 constitution was overwhelmingly passed by Kenyans who are composed of both men and women. This was not a contested issue. Right. This was an issue that passed. Again, and I have to go back to, we need to be more careful and nuanced when we're trying to come to the root cause of this problem, because it's not as simple as saying because women are just voters, then they can go ahead and vote without first addressing the structural and systemic issues that bar that from happening.
All right.
A true democracy requires representation from everyone, not just a few. And just the last point, this decision was passed in 2017. So I do not understand why now parties are in a panic or looking like they were caught by surprise. This is something they've been aware of since 2017. They had an obligation under the law to come up with a framework that will ensure that there's no confusion, that they ensure that they'll be able to actualize the decision in a fair, lawful, and open and credible manner.
All right.
That was their obligation according to the law.
All right. So, Florence, I mean, we were talking about, articles of the Constitution. We talked about Article 27 on gender parity, which contradicts Article 38 on political rights, meaning Kenyans have the right to vote for whoever they want. And when I look at that, then Article 38, democracy means first past the post, So why then does it look like, because that is what our male counterparts are looking at it, like why force that this should be a balance when people have the right to exercise the democratic right of choosing who will represent them?
When presented with a representation of how their society looks like. Our society is both male and female. When I'm presented with both, then I'm able to choose who I want among that. When it gets to the IEBC ballot, whoever they choose, that will be fine. But until it comes there in a balanced way, it will still be difficult for us to choose more women. Since 1963, we've been led by men. And every time we have one woman there, we celebrate that at least we have one woman. It shouldn't be the case. And even the issue of saying that, we have more women voters. There are other barriers, also structural, that affect women to go and vote in the first place. Patriarchy has entrenched itself, and the patriarchy is not perpetuated by only men. It is also perpetuated by women because of our cultural way. If I've grown up seeing only a man lead, I have not seen a picture of a woman lead. What do you think I'll be able to vote for? I will assume, wait a minute, I will assume that it's only a man that can lead. In communities, and I've done anthropology, in the communities where people grew up that the best respected person was a teacher. Everybody grew up wanting to be who? A teacher. So until you are showing the society the both faces of who can represent them, then it is very mischievous to then say that women are many and they're not choosing their own.
But then practically, let's look at it this way. When it came to the party primaries, most of the seats, apart from the woman representative seats, we saw the men coming out to run for these seats.
Yes.
Then why, if the women didn't come out, this word of must looks like it's a dictatorial which contradicts democracy of Article 38 of the Constitution.
Democracy, like Christina says, ensures there's proper representation. That's why we are very clear on also people living with disability. That is a representation. Why? Because until I am on the table, my issues will never be taken care of. And at some moment you asked Christine whether the women who are in parliament failed the rest of the women. No, they did not. Look at the numbers that are there. Are they enough to pass one single bill? They're not. They still need their male counterparts to come on their side. And if men are not believing that also women are equal to the task, it's very difficult to convince a bill, convince the rest to move a bill. So that is why we need more women in there, because there are certain things, Brenda, that only you and I understand because of our agenda. Right. And there are certain things that only men understand because of their agenda. So when it comes to representation of the nation, we need to have those faces there. And even if we don't get 50, we're not even asking for 50%. We are saying a third. What if one day we get to a place where women are 2/3 and men are 1/3?
Right.
What conversation will we be having?
We probably be having a conversation of now the man gender, the male gender. But then Agwanda, I know I wanted to direct this question to Christine, but I also need your mind on it. I need to pick your mind on it. This argument that this 2/3 gender rule should not just be achieved through political parties, but also the independent candidates. You have female independent candidates. This can be achieved through the independent candidates.
I like what Kristen said. She actually said that this seemed to be a systemic structural issue in the country. I agree. The question is, once we identify that it's a systemic structural issue, I think what we need to look at further is how do we solve that systemic structural issue. The question therefore will be, is it only through Parliament and the courts of law? Absolutely not. I am thinking that if they had started talking about civic education and going to every corner of this country and saying, look, we need a representation that is 2/3 gender of either. And for that reason, we are asking you women to vote. We are asking you women to present yourself. And we know you'll have challenges, but get out there anyway. Anyway, let me now answer the question that you asked me. And the question you asked me is now we have over 7,200 independent, registered or approved by registrar political parties that are going to go bottleneck with the big parties as well as the small parties. The question that everybody will ask is it possible that the independent will be able to fight a good fight, a democratic fight amongst their colleagues who are in the structured political parties and win? And if they win, perhaps in many constituencies, or for senatorial, or for governor, the question that everybody is going to ask is how many women presented themselves as independent candidates? Because if the political parties are to be blamed here, we want to see how many have decided that I will go for the independent so that I don't go into this grisly, bruisey, competition within the party, but I will go where I will find myself at the ballot box and present myself to the people so that they can elect the women as well.
All right,
and
so Kristen.
But as I conclude on that, I think if that happens, then it will be an opportunity not to fight with the political parties that have been accused a lot by the many aspirants during their primaries, but also an opportunity for the independent aspirants to have a space of their own and to seek for legitimacy within the electorate. The question is, so if they don't, then
yes.
what next?
So, Christine, do you agree with Agwanda's school of thought? You know, when it comes to independent candidates, some of them are women. They're amongst that number, the 7,200 who are going as independents, achieving that 2/3 gender rule.
I know, and the simple answer is because political parties are actually public bodies. They're actually funded with taxpayers' money to make political parties strong or stronger because of the critical role they play in our democracy. And one of the obligations that is placed under the Political Parties Act to political parties who receive public funding is one of the objects of receiving public funding is to promote gender parity in Parliament and in other elective bodies. So they actually get money from us to promote gender equity in Parliament. That includes in their nomination processes. And therefore, that's why I would not place this responsibility to independent candidates who do not get public funding, whereas political parties specifically get funding for this purpose.
All right. And you know, Florence, there's that issue of civic education that also Michael Agwanda brings into this discussion about educating the public, the community about the role of women in politics, the importance of this country achieving that 2/3 gender rule. Then this means it is the missing link in terms of the country, the people at the community level knowing about the existence of this 2/3 gender rule?
And who did he say is responsible for civic education? Because when it comes to civic education, on all matters, civic education, the government has the responsibility to do that. And in this case, IEBC needed to spend a lot of time educating the public about even voting, how they're going to vote, whether they need a voter's card or they don't need, and all this, and the requirements that are there for all political parties and for people. So civic education is supposed to be done by our taxpayers, taxes, and they did not do that. And so even if you say women go out and educate other women, where are we getting this funding? Where are we getting this? And even if NGOs did it, NGOs cannot reach all the corners of this country. They cannot reach Pokot. Government can reach Pokot. They cannot reach Lamu in the interior. Government can reach Lamu. So we have not deliberately, we don't have, I can say, political will. You know, we seem to have it, and then we seem not to have it, because then we are not taking the steps to support or back what we say is the political will.
So according to you, Florence, who is failing the country? Because when you look at President Uhuru Kenyatta, he's the party leader of Jubilee Party. Honorable Raila Odinga, party leader of the ODM party. Wiper, we have Kalonzo, you know, and then now we have the deputy president in UDA.
Yes.
Who is actually failing the country when it comes to the 2/3 gender rule?
I actually looked at the candidates of UDA Nairobi, just Nairobi. I didn't even go MCA. And I found one woman in terms of the women rep. The rest are men in terms of the constituencies. So when you look at that, again, you ask yourself, do you really care that your face does not represent the people that you're asking to vote for you? You and I will analyze that and decide, you know what, I'm only going to vote a party that looks like it cares about women. I will do that personally. But the rest of Mwananchi might not understand the intricacies that go on through parties, what is possible, and what Christine is saying. If you are getting funding from our taxes, why aren't you deliberately making an effort to follow the Constitution, or even attempt, so that we can see you actually tried? But we are not seeing that. So civic education is not the honors of NGOs. It is the honors of government to educate its people.
All right. So Agwanda, same question that I'd asked Florence, and you know, I didn't get a direct answer from you, Florence, in terms of how will the political parties achieve this 2/3 gender rule now that the party primaries are over? Will they recall all the nomination certificates they've given out?
I am waiting to see what IEBC will do in terms of if the list comes in and it doesn't have a balance, even a third, or they don't even look to have tried. I'm waiting to see what IEBC will do. But even if they don't do anything, and now we are where we are, and like Christine said, it is not a surprise thing. I mean, they knew this thing was coming. They needed to have recruited more. I know a small party which decided we're waiving all nomination fees because they recognize resources is also one of the hindrances for women to run for office. And so, given that, many women will struggle with getting money for nomination fee, getting money to run around and go around the whole constituency to try and convince people and print t-shirts and all that. It's resources is a big barrier.
All right.
And so if parties knew all that, and still in the final list when we look at it, we see even the parties that seem to have the money did not even attempt, then it shows there's lack of political will. Okay, lack of political will, that is what Florence is saying, Agwanda. But what options do political parties have to achieve this directive? I don't want to say IEBC's directive, but the court's directive.
Brenda, I like how Florence is talking. Sometimes we say very nice things on TV and say how the government need to fund this because we give them money. If the same government is struggling to pay their loans, which they cannot pay on time, the same government is struggling to pay some of their pending bills, which they are not able. I'm not standing here, holding brief on them, but I'm just saying we know that the government is struggling. Affirmative action was not funded entirely by the women, by the government. It was funded by, friends of the women. It was funded by non-profit organization. It was funded by other bilateral organization. And so the question of affirmative action not being done, through the support of other agencies that have been really, really good to the women fraternity in this country, to me, is a little bit difficult to understand. And we can't say that if they cannot do it, then we have no way to do it. That's not how we need to think. I mean, I work for an NGO world. I work in the NGO world, and I know that a lot of laws and a lot of structural changes in this country that have taken place over the years has been as a result of partnership and non-profit organizations that have come forth to really help in a big way. The question you've asked me, Brenda, is what then will the parties do to ensure that affirmative action, not affirmative action, but two-thirds gender rule is going to survive? Let me tell you, if you by any chance remove a ticket awarded to somebody that won in the primaries, they will take you to court. And that court will nullify that attempt for you to take a certificate that has already been given to an individual that was actually elected in the primaries and by the people, the majority of the people in that constituency or in that ward or in that county. And for that reason, it's practically impossible to implement this now if everybody has been given a chance to present themselves and to be nominated by the people. Otherwise, what should have happened in this case is perhaps we would have gone the nomination way. I mean, the direct issuance of tickets, so that you know that this party is not going to do what we call free and fair primaries. And then they will select individuals and say, we are only going to give 3 men and 6 women for that reason. Here are the tickets. That did not happen, and so it is practically impossible.
All right. So, Christine, let me just read this statement by the Speaker, from the Office of the Speaker of the National Assembly that was issued on the 22nd of September in 2020. And this is what it said. To begin, it is a state that is empowered to ensure that 2/3 of members of all elective and appointive positions are not of the same gender. As a concept, the state is a form of a political community. And the reason as to why I'm asking you, I'm reading this statement, is what that statement says, that the state is a form of a political community and refers to various organs. And so the state must be distinguished from the government, which refers to a group of people who are usually in charge of state apparatus. So the Office of the Speaker goes ahead to say it is therefore the state as a broad entity that is vested with the obligation to take measures towards ensuring gender parity. Here, the Office of the Speaker terming the state as, quote unquote, a form of a political community.
Yes, it's quite interesting because Parliament is a state office. So in any event, it would form part of that state. The state is a collection of all of those bodies that come together to run a country. So that, to me, does not offer any real distinction because the Constitution says everybody is bound by it, be it us as citizen, be it public officials, state officials, government, whatever you define yourself as, you're bound by the Constitution. And there are certain direct measures that bind different agencies. And one of them is Parliament, and it has been bound by express provisions of the Constitution. Therefore, they cannot run away from this. Just as you've said, that there's even the government itself, the National Executive, must have a gender-compliant cabinet. The judiciary, the Supreme Court, every institution has its own obligations. But here, right now, we are talking about political representation. And it's unfair to say that nothing can be done if no attempt has been done at all. We are where we were in 2010 when we were passing this Constitution. we cannot now say it has failed. We have not made even an attempt to try to change the situation. And if there was political will, much would have been done.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've run out of time, so I'll give each a minute to respond to my question. Florence, I mean, we had the initiative to amend the Constitution through the BBI, you know, which the Supreme Court stopped. And the issue on the 2/3 gender rule, do you think it can be subjected to a referendum?
I don't think we're there yet. I believe if we get to a point where the women of Kenya are tired, maybe it will get there, but I cannot preempt that. I think for me, like we said, like Christine last point, we have not attempted to do much and to ensure that there is equal representation, even if not equal, but at least a third representation, especially where political office is concerned. So until we try and do that, and I feel like every time we get to Parliament, after we'll have the new Parliament after August, there's always an attempt to pretend that they're trying to create a formula, while they could avoid the formula from the beginning.
Including what you call the top up of the women representative seats.
For me, it is to start here so that we don't get to a point where we're in Parliament and saying, oh, this is too hard, oh, we cannot do it, so that you tell wananchi, this is impossible. It is not impossible if you know you have women who qualify to be at cabinet secretary level. You have women who are able to lead this country and offer alternative leadership. But you can, the structural issues that we've talked about, the barriers that we face. Indeed, Chapter 6 of the Waki Commission shows what happened to women during the 2007 election. So women still have that in their mind, that when elections come, there's always violence. And also that deters the women to go and vote. So there are many things for the voter and also for the woman who's trying to run for office. Until we deal with those barriers, as a nation, putting laws in place and resources in place to protect women aspirants, but also to make sure that our environment, we are not having violent politics.
A conducive environment.
Exactly, for us to feel we are safe, whether I'm a young person, whether I'm a woman, whether I'm a person living with disability, that then I can offer myself and I won't run the risk of being violated just because I offer myself.
But then, Christine, as they bring Agwanda to get his final sentiments, you might not, I mean, as a country, we should not also lose sight to the real challenges in implementing this matter and turn Parliament. Let me try and be the devil's advocate here, you know, turning Parliament into a punching bag on the account of gender parity.
So either we are buying into one narrative and ignoring everything else that has happened, which gives a different story, which paints a different picture. As I said, every time this question came up for voting, there was no quorum, whereas there are other issues where parliamentarians are very interested in, there's full quorum. So I do not think it's an unfair characterization. It all goes to political will. But more than that, even though they are now saying that we're in this process whereby now we got this letter and we are done nominations, but then it means you are done nominations contrary to the law. You knew of this decision, you knew this was required of you. It is in the Political Parties Act, and that provision was there even before the 2017 decision. More provisions on gender parity were introduced by this same parliament in February, talking about gender parity and increasing gender, greater gender representation for women in parliament. So they are well aware of their obligations under the law, but they still chose to conduct a nomination process contrary to the law. So again, are we going to keep on entrenching impunity and violating of the law? Are we going to be all bound by the law? Are we going to let the rule of law reign? Or are we going to say some people are bound by the law and others are not?
All right, Agwanda, your final closing remarks in a minute.
Kristen, thank you so much for giving me ideas. I just want to let you know that when matters goes to Parliament, there's something called lobbying. And if you don't lobby for anything, people will not show up. And let me tell you, yes, you're talking about impunity. That is exactly what they're exercising in Parliament. In fact, to a certain extent, those parliamentarians have to be induced to vote in a certain way. If lobbying is not done, they will not pass anything, I can tell you for free. And secondly, I want to say this. If any chance we get, we have to go to court or expect Parliament to do the right thing. We are to implement this gender parity. We are definitely not going to head anywhere. My advice to the gender parity representation is let's do civic education and serious civic education, and then lobby within the big parties. Once you do that, then perhaps you can see even a quarter of it. But once people have been elected and in Parliament, it is practically impossible to get this done. And whatever you want to call it, whether impunity or whatever it is, violation of the laws of this country, I can't see that happening because we've had leaders that have been summoned in court and they refuse to do that. And some of those leaders are the ones ahead in Parliament. So literally, I think we need to find a better way. All right, we need to find a better way. So we wait and see what will happen, because IBC says that in the event that a political party presents 290 candidates for constituency-based elective positions, not more than 193 candidates should be of the same gender. So, wait and see political parties will adhere to this. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my panelists, Florence Mashio, Regional Advocacy Technical Advisor at the Population Action International, and Michael Agwanda, Political Analyst, and also Christine Konge, an advocate and also an Executive Director at Katiba Institute. My name is Brenda Zederadido. Enjoy the rest of your viewing.